It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in the peaceful town of Rochdale, England. The countryside stretched under a gentle sun, birds chirping, and a soft breeze moving through the tall grass. Inside a small farmhouse, laughter echoed, the laughter of 3-year-old Daniel Twigg. He was playing near the window, clutching his toy car, while his mother, Joanne Bedford, prepared lunch. Everything felt normal, safe, ordinary. But sometimes, the most peaceful days hide the darkest storms. Outside, behind the wooden fence, the family's dogs stirred restlessly. Massive, muscular animals, trained to guard, not to play. Their deep growls rolled through the air like thunder. At 2:30 p.m., Daniel asked to go outside. He loved the open yard, the smell of grass, the sound of the wind. His parents didn't think twice. It was just another day. But what they didn't know was that the gate to the dog enclosure hadn't latched properly that morning. The air was calm, but fate was already moving toward them. The Twigg family's farmhouse wasn't just home, it was a fortress. Behind it, cages and pens filled with large dogs lined the back area. Some were guard dogs, others for breeding, all strong, restless, and powerful. Neighbors had complained before. They said the dogs barked through the night, their roars echoing across the valley. But no one could have imagined what those sounds would one day mean. Mark Twigg, Daniel's father, had a habit of keeping dogs untrained but defensive, believing they were protection for the property. That morning, one of the chains had been replaced. The lock? Slightly loose. In the yard, Daniel's small footsteps fell on soft earth. The dogs watched him through the fence, their instincts waking like a switch flipped on. And then, a sound. A clink of metal. The gate shifted. Just an inch. Enough. At 2:45 p.m., the first scream echoed across the quiet field. A single bark turned into many. Then chaos. The dogs, 2 of them, massive and built for strength, pushed through the half-latched gate and charged. Daniel didn't even have time to run. The silence of the countryside shattered under a storm of barking and terror. Inside, Joanne dropped the plate she was holding and ran toward the door. "Daniel!" she screamed. When she reached the yard, what she saw would haunt her forever. The dogs were on him. Mark rushed in, grabbing at their collars, shouting, punching, pulling, but their power was unstoppable. It took minutes to drag them off. Minutes that cost a life. The camera panned slowly across Daniel's old yard, now silent, stripped of life. The cages are gone. The grass has overgrown. Only a few forgotten toys remain, half buried in the dirt, small, faded symbols of a childhood cut short. The wind brushes gently through the empty space, rattling the old fence as if whispering his name. The lens lingers on a cracked plastic car, its colors bleached by the sun. Then the frame softens into darkness. A voice breaks the silence, calm, steady, filled with sorrow. Narrator. Daniel Twigg was only 3 years old. He never went to school. Never blew out his 4th birthday candles. His laughter now lives only in memory. A faint piano begins, slow, distant notes echoing like memories fading down a hallway. A photograph fades onto the screen, Daniel smiling, sunlight behind him, his cheeks still round with innocence. The image trembles slightly, as if alive for just a moment more before dissolving back into the quiet landscape of his empty yard. Narrator softly. If one thing remains after this tragedy, it's the truth that love without responsibility can destroy what you love most. A long beat of silence follows. The sound of wind returns, soft, cold, endless. The camera tilts upward, capturing the farmhouse, the trees beyond it, and the gate, once open, now locked and still. Narrator, final words, voice low but resolute. So if you have a dog, remember Daniel's story. Train it. Control it. Because one unlocked gate can change everything. The screen fades to black. A soft hum lingers in the background. Then, one final text appears, white against darkness. In memory of Daniel Twigg, 2019 to 2022. Some gates can never be closed again. In the months that followed, the small town of Rochdale fell under a heavy silence, the kind that lingers long after the sirens fade. The farmhouse at the edge of town, once filled with laughter, now stood empty behind a rusted gate. Locals began to leave flowers there, bright petals against gray mud. Small teddy bears, children's drawings, and handwritten notes were tied to the fence. On one paper heart, in a child's handwriting, were 4 simple words. "Rest in peace, Daniel." The wind carried those words across the fields. Some said they could still hear the faint echo of barking at night, the sound that had once signaled chaos, now only a reminder of everything that was lost. One neighbor, an older man who had lived nearby for decades, said softly to a reporter, "Every time I pass that place, I still hear the barking. I still see the flashing lights." His voice cracked halfway through, and the camera cut away before his tears could fall. As the story spread, Rochdale became a name that meant more than a location. It became a symbol of grief, of lessons learned too late. National news channels replayed the same footage, police tape fluttering in the wind, stuffed animals lined along the gate, and the faint outline of a home swallowed by tragedy. Across the UK, parents began asking the same haunting question. How could this happen? And worse, could it happen again? Talk shows debated responsibility. Some blamed the parents. Others blamed the system. But beyond the arguments, something deeper began to stir, a fear that this wasn't an isolated tragedy, but a warning. Dog owners looked differently at their pets. Families double-checked their fences, their gates, their instincts. Social media filled with posts saying, "It could never happen to me." But for many, Daniel's story proved it could. In classrooms, teachers spoke quietly about safety. In homes, parents held their children a little tighter. And in Rochdale, the farmhouse remained untouched, a silent reminder of what happens when love and danger meet under one roof. The grass grew long. The toys faded in the sun. But the memory didn't fade. It stayed, in the streets, in the hearts of neighbors, in the cold, empty yard where a 3-year-old once played. Months later, a single white balloon was seen tied to the gate. It read only, "Forever 3. The camera lingers on it as the wind pulls at the string, lifting it gently against the gray sky. Narrator, final words. Rochdale never forgot. Because some stories don't end with a sentence. They echo, quietly, in every home that believes, it could never happen here. Fade to black. Soft piano music rises. In memory of Daniel Twigg, 2019 to 2022. A warning the world should never ignore. Outside, the sky had turned gray. Rain began to fall as the couple was led out of the courthouse. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, their voices cutting through the storm. Do you feel justice has been done? Do you blame the system or yourselves? But Joanne and Mark didn't answer. They didn't even raise their heads. They walked slowly, side by side, their eyes empty, their world shattered. They didn't just lose their freedom that day. They lost the last piece of the life they had known, their son, their home, their future. The headlines would call it justice. The news tickers would flash. Parents jailed after 3-year-old killed by dogs. But inside that courtroom, no one felt like justice had truly been served. There were no winners, only survivors of a story that should never have been written. As the rain grew heavier, the courthouse steps emptied, leaving only the echo of footsteps and the faint hum of the storm. Back in Rochdale, the family's old farmhouse stood silent. The gate, the same one that once swung open to let the dogs out, creaked softly in the wind. The yard was empty now, the laughter gone. Only a forgotten toy lay in the grass, half buried in mud and memories. Neighbors sometimes passed by, leaving flowers, teddy bears, and small notes tied to the fence. Most of them said the same thing. Rest in peace, little one. In her cell, Joanne would later write a letter no one would ever see. In it she said, "If I could trade places with him, I would. Every night, I still hear him calling my name." Mark, in his separate prison block, kept silent. The guards said he rarely spoke, but sometimes, late at night, he could be heard whispering to himself. "I should have locked the gate." Justice had been served, but peace had not. Because some sentences don't end when the prison doors close. Some live on, in memories, in guilt, in the echoes of a child's laughter that will never return. Daniel's story ended that spring afternoon, but for his parents, it would replay forever. The tragedy was over. The punishment had begun. As the screen fades to black, the final words appear. In memory of Daniel Twigg, 2019 to 2022. Some tragedies don't end with justice, they end with heartbreak. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels alive, pressing against your chest. Reporters filled the benches, their pens poised but unmoving. 2 years had passed since the tragic death of 3-year-old Daniel Twigg, and now, the world waited for judgment. At the front sat his parents, Joanne Bedford and Mark Twigg, faces pale, eyes hollow, hands trembling. They didn't look at each other. They hadn't for months. The door opened, and the judge entered. Everyone rose. The air itself seemed to freeze as he adjusted his robe and began to speak. He started softly, but each word struck like a hammer. "This court has heard a tragedy," he said. "A tragedy that was entirely preventable. The prosecution had shown everything, the open gate, the ignored warnings, the untrained dogs left to roam. This was no accident," the judge continued. "It was a failure of care, of responsibility, of love." The sound of his voice filled the room, echoing against the wooden walls. Joanne's shoulders began to shake. Mark stared straight ahead, unblinking, his jaw locked. You could almost hear the ticking of the courtroom clock, each second dragging the weight of guilt deeper into their hearts. The judge's next words were colder, sharper, final. "The failure was yours," he said. "And the price was a child's life." For a moment, no one breathed. Joanne covered her face with her hands and broke into quiet sobs. Mark lowered his head, whispering something no one could hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a name. Even the officers standing by the door seemed frozen in place, unwilling to move, unwilling to disturb the unbearable silence. Then, with a deep breath, the judge delivered the sentence. "Joanne Bedford," he read slowly, "for your role in this tragedy, you are sentenced to 3 years and 6 months in prison. Mark Twigg, 2 years and 8 months. Both of you are banned from owning or keeping dogs for 15 years. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The sound of the gavel striking once was enough. A single, hollow echo, the sound of justice and loss colliding in the same breath. The air was filled with panic. Joanne's screams tore through the stillness as Mark dialed 999 with shaking hands. "Please! It's our son, the dogs, they attacked him. He's not breathing." Paramedics arrived within minutes, but the scene was already devastating. Daniel lay motionless, blood staining the grass beneath him. His toy car was a few feet away, untouched, gleaming in the sunlight. The medics tried CPR. Oxygen. Everything. They rushed him to hospital by helicopter. The blades cut through the air, drowning out the sound of Joanne's sobs. But even before they landed, the boy's pulse faded. At the hospital, doctors tried one last time to bring him back. At 3:28 p.m., Daniel Twigg was pronounced dead. Police sealed off the property within hours. Blue lights flashed against the stone walls, officers moving carefully among the cages. The dogs were seized. Their eyes reflected the flashing lights, calm now, but too late. Detectives began questioning neighbors. One of them said, "We always knew something bad would happen there. Those dogs weren't normal." Mark sat on the ground, head in his hands, silent. Joanne was taken to hospital for shock. By sunset, the news had already spread. 3-year-old killed in dog attack in Rochdale. But the investigation had just begun. Days later, reports confirmed the worst. The dogs were unlicensed and kept in unsafe enclosures. Investigators discovered that the Twigg family had been warned before about their dog's aggression, but no serious action was taken. Bodycam footage from that day revealed a haunting scene: toys scattered, blood in the grass, and the gate swinging slowly in the wind. One officer said quietly, "This was preventable. 100% preventable." It was no longer just a tragedy, it was a case of negligence. Months later, Mark Twigg and Joanne Bedford stood before the Manchester Crown Court. They were charged under the Dangerous Dogs Act 1991, accused of failing to control dangerous animals leading to the death of a child. In the courtroom, silence filled the air as the judge read the case file. Photos of Daniel were shown. Joanne cried silently. Mark stared blankly at the floor. The prosecutor's voice was cold. You knew these dogs were dangerous. You knew they had attacked before. And still, you did nothing. The defense argued it was an accident. But the evidence was undeniable. When the verdict came, guilty, the silence was deafening.